and our minds, right? So like internal and external goals, interference can also take on or can come from internal or external sources, right? And we can divide these into things like distractions or actual interruptions. So in terms of external interference, this could be multitasking. And then on the internal side of things, we also have distractions and interruptions, but they take different forms, right? So a distraction might be a mental thought intrusion or mind wandering, as some people like to call it, task unrelated thoughts. There are lots of terms out in the literature for these, and I know you as many of you have studied these types of intrusions much more than I have. But you can also have interruptions, which could be diversions or mental multitasking, right? So you could actively try to engage in multiple sort of thought streams at the same time. So one of the things that we've been really interested in early on was sort of understanding how the brain enables all of this goal-directed behavior and avoidance of interference. But more recently, really in the last 5 to 10 years, we've moved toward being more translational and trying to figure out how can we develop new methods and interventions, and most of them being technology-based, to help people reduce their susceptibility to interference and increase their cognitive control and their ability to attend to the important things in the environment. So so much of our work up until maybe 5 years ago really focused on external distractions, right? And it makes sense. They're easier to manipulate in a laboratory setting. We can flash lights, we can play sounds, they're very easy to do. But we got very interested in trying to turn our attention to these internal distractions as well, or internal forms of interference, and trying to find ways to help people improve their ability to avoid internal distractions, unwanted internal distractions. Some of them are good, but when you don't want them, you need to avoid them. So rather than completely reinventing the wheel, we turn toward the extensive literature on meditation, which many of you have contributed to in large part. And just a few, obviously this is not comprehensive, but this is just a few of the, of the background. I don't probably need to tell most of you here, but some of the studies that have looked at the impact of meditation on cognitive control. There are a number of studies that have shown that attending a 4 to 10 day retreat can improve working memory, the ability to hold items in mind in order to solve a problem or do a task. So these are a couple of those studies. And there are lots of studies on sustained attention, right? So the ability to maintain consistent attention on a task over time, right? Even if you're getting bored or if you have distractions that are either internal or external. So lots of different tasks. I'm not going to go into the details of these tasks. If you're interested in any of them, I'm happy to talk through them. But there are also some limitations to the the existing meditation literature. And up until relatively recently, a lot of these studies weren't true RCTs, randomized controlled trials. A lot of the control groups were not the best in terms of balancing for placebo effects. In addition, there have been a number of null findings especially in the attention domain. And also, it sort of occurred to us that traditional forms of meditation are often expensive, if we talk about having to go away to a retreat or sign up for a class, and they typically require trained instructors. Now, obviously, there are lots of mindfulness apps that have come out in recent years, but we actually really wanted to take more of a neuroplasticity-based approach to coming up with a focused attention meditation training. And this is just kind of an overview. This is really this closed loop approach is really at the heart of almost everything we do at Neuroscape in terms of developing our interventions. So the idea is, most cognitive interventions that are out there are what we call open loop, right? You play a game, and there's perhaps there might be some increase in performance, but it's not tailored specifically to the person doing the training, right? In the closed loop, what we do is we monitor people's performance, and we adjust the difficulty of the performance based on some sort of feedback that we get, either the person's performance, or it could be some kind of neural signal in the case of neurofeedback. In this case, we developed a meditation training program or intervention that monitors people's performance and adjusts the difficulty based on how they're doing at any given time. So here's, I think I mentioned, we call this MediTrain. This is the intervention itself. It was developed in collaboration with Jack Kornfield, who some of you may know. He's a kind of a thought leader in the mindfulness realm. He co-founded Spirit Rock Retreat Center up in Marin. And we also had a really great opportunity to work with professional game designers at Zynga.org. Unfortunately, that's a now defunct branch of Zynga, the social gaming company that's over in near China Basin. But they used to have a philanthropic arm, and their goal was to design games for positive change in the world. So we were able to collaborate with them, and so they brought a whole team of designers to the table, and we came up with what we think would turn out to be a very pleasing app. This is originally it was iOS, now it's cross-platform intervention. The idea was to have it be influenced by the traditional focused attention meditation practices, like directing your attention to a selected object, in our case, breath, and then detection of mind wandering and distractions that occur, different thoughts that enter, and just sort of letting them go and refocusing your attention on the breath. But the key thing that differentiates this approach from other meditation apps and programs is that we really try to include core fundamental neuroplasticity-based principles. So we made the goals quantifiable, right? So there's a quantitative aspect to the training. Repetition is really important. We found this in lots of different interventions, that the more you repeat things, the better people are able to adapt to it. We also provide feedback, quantified feedback, which is sort of an interesting thing that doesn't necessarily always accompany the learning of a meditation practice. And then again, as I mentioned before, we have this adaptive component where there's this closed loop that adjusts the difficulty based on performance on a given trial. I'll play, hopefully I have the audio going. This is just a little screenshot I'll take you through. I'll probably skip ahead at a couple of points because it's a little long in the sake of time. But this will just give you a feel for what a participant would go through in the course of the training. They get some instructions.
Welcome to MediTrain. For the next 6 weeks, you'll be using the
app to practice
a meditation lesson or mindfulness
breathing,
lesson from Jack,
which is a training in mindfulness attention. During this training period, suggestions.
They get, I do want to go back here, so they get daily tips that they see each day to help them, progress in their training, in their practice, and then they go into the actual meditation. They do a little survey before they start, and then they go into the actual meditation.
You're about to begin your first meditation session. When you hear the chime, please close your eyes and focus on your breath.
Yeah, and so they, I'll just stop it there for a second. So they respond just by pressing on this was originally done on an iPad. You can do it on a phone, but you just make a button press. And the idea is to try to, once they learn how to do this, they keep their eyes closed throughout the entire training. And then just to show you, we have a calendar, and then there's also feedback. Like I said, there's quantified feedback that they can monitor, either in a full day view, or they can kind of zoom in and look at their training over the course of each session for each day, right? So, and we find, especially in certain populations, that having this type of feedback is often very motivating, right? To really engage in the practice in a different way than if you didn't have any sort of feedback at all. All right, so for the rest of the talk, that's kind of the background on the intervention. So far we've completed 3 complete randomized controlled trials of MediTrain in different populations. The first one we did was in young adults, 20 to 30-year-olds here in the Bay Area. And this was an in-lab, these are actually all in-lab studies, but they came into the lab and did a bunch of assessments. The second study we did was led by a collaborator of mine, Jyoti Mishra, who's now down at USC, or UCSD, sorry. And she actually took MediTrain to India. And there was a group of 45 adolescents in New Delhi who completed 6 weeks of training with this. So I'll show you some of the results from that really interesting study. And then the most recent one that we just completed, luckily before we had to go to shelter in place, was this a larger study in healthy older adults. These are older adults between 60 to 85 years of age. And this is the one that we've really been sort of collaborating more with Alyssa and Eric on. So we're really excited to show you some of those data. In fact, you're the first people to see the data outside of Neuroscape. So I haven't presented this anywhere, the older adult data anywhere yet. So pretty exciting. All right, so let me start with the results from the young adult study. And I'm just going to kind of give highlights for the sake of time because I want to leave plenty of time for discussion. This is just an overview of the protocol. In all of these studies, this training protocol was the same. So we asked participants to train for 5 days per week for 6 weeks. And we increased the total amount of training throughout the course of the intervention. So they start with just 20 minutes of training and they increase up to 30. In this study, participants came into UCSF and they were given an MRI. We did EEG recordings during cognitive tasks, so electroencephalography. And then we did these both at baseline and then immediately following the training. So here are this was a relatively small study, but again, this was really our first proof of concept study of MediTrain. So we had 24 young adults complete MediTrain, 20 placebo, fairly well matched in terms of sex and age distributions. So no real red flags there. These are the primary cognitive outcomes that we used. And I'm going to focus mostly on TOVA today, the test of variable attention. It's a sustained attention task. There's also an impulsivity component that I'm not going to really talk about. But then we also did a bunch of other tasks, a distractor filtering task. So in this task, well, I'll talk about it in the older adult data, so I'll not go into it now. But we also then did a couple of working memory tasks as well. And then, so during TOVA, we collected EEG data as well as during the working memory tasks. One thing I do want to point out is that, obviously we put a lot of effort into our developing our interventions, but we also at Neuroscape put a lot of thought into what we use as a placebo control. And this is actually something, an issue that has plagued the cognitive training field for decades. It's been one of the biggest and most justifiable criticisms of many of the cognitive training studies out there. And the idea is that, if you give somebody an app or an intervention and they expect that it's going to improve their attention or their working memory, then you're potentially setting yourself up for a placebo effect. And if you have another group that either is what we call a no contact control group where they don't do anything, they would not have any expectation of improvement. So one of the things that we do is we actually do large scale studies using MTurk. We do mobile studies before we launch the intervention to figure out what would be good expectancy controlled placebo gains to give to a control group so that they have matched expectations of improving in the different domains that we're interested in, right? And we're interested in testing. So what we found for this particular intervention, that a combination of 3 different games, there's a Tai Chi app, a language learning app, which at this time, nobody knew about Duolingo. It's gotten to be very popular now, so it wasn't due to us, but. And then a logic games app that they trained with. So they would train on these each for a matched amount of time compared to MediTrain. And the expectations of improvement were nicely matched. So that's what they did, 5 days a week for 6 weeks, 20, 25, 30 minutes. So all fairly well matched. So the main outcome measure, I wanted to take just a second to introduce this, in case you haven't heard about it. What our main measure of interest in these attention tasks is what we call trial-to-trial variability in response time, right? So response time is how fast you respond to a task, right? That's pretty straightforward. But the responses can be highly variable. So this is an example of what we call a no trial. It doesn't really matter, but there are lots of trials you can see over here. And on the go trials, the person has to hit a button. And what you can see is the majority of those trials fall within this green range here, which is what is under this Gaussian curve over here. But you can also see that there are a number of much slower responses, high is slow, and there are a number of slightly faster responses. So overall, this is what we are referring to when we talk about the variability in response time. And there are lots of different ways of modeling this. You can just take the standard deviation, or you can do some more complex modeling techniques as well. But this RT variability dates back to the age of Galton. He actually was measuring this, and it's considered a marker of attentional stability throughout a long task. And in general, low variability is considered good because the idea is that you're focused in, you're honed in on the task, and you're paying attention, and you're making very consistent responses. High variability means that there's a lot of inconsistency, right? So on some trials, you're really slow, and then you kind of get back into it, and you're fast, and then your mind might wander, and you're slow again. So this is really thought to correspond to lapses in attention and mind wandering and that sort of thing. That it's sort of a quantified way of measuring that. So this is the main thing that I'm going to be showing you for a number of the tasks. So the main cognitive task that I'm going to show from this young adult study is what we call the test of variable attention. And again, as I said, this is a sustained attention, what we call vigilance task. You have to really, it's quite boring actually by design. And the idea is to kind of, make people, you have to really pay attention in order to be able to do it well and consistently. And again, it's quite simple. We have people stare at a plus sign in the middle of a screen, and a gray box flashes on either the top or the bottom of the screen. And the goal is to respond whenever there's a flash on the top of the screen. But the majority of stimuli are flashing at the bottom of the screen. So only on 10% of the trials do the people are people supposed to respond, right? So that infrequent occurrence of the target that requires a response means that they have to be really tuned in and paying attention to the task, and they're ignoring a lot of these things that happen on the bottom of the screen, right? So what we found is that from pre to post, before and after the intervention, here we see response time variability in milliseconds, and you can see that there's a significant decrease in response time variability in the group that trained with MediTrain, and there was absolutely no change in the placebo group. So the MediTrain group is able to sustain their attention more consistently from trial to trial after performing this focused attention meditation training. So it's really exactly what we would want to see. And these are some of the curves. You can see that in the MediTrain group, the curve of response times was, or the distribution was much broader and didn't have a high peak, but it becomes much a bit narrower, and you have a more obvious peak after the training. And the placebo group really didn't show any change at all in that. So that was really exciting. I'm not going to show the data, but we actually found the same exact decrease in RT variability on another completely independent task. So it wasn't that it was just improvement on this one task. There was another task where they showed the same improvements as well. I just want to show you one of the findings from the EEG data. We had several markers of attention that actually increased following the training with MediTrain. This was the one that we were most excited about. There's this oscillation in the brain, a theta oscillation. So it's about 4 to 7 hertz. So there are fluctuations in firing of neurons at that frequency. And when it occurs in the sort of middle front part of the brain here, that's often associated with attentional modulation or sustained attention. And what we found is in this time window here, the group that trained with MediTrain showed an significant increase in the coherence or the consistency of that oscillation. So the oscillation became more consistent from trial to trial after training with MediTrain, and there was no change in the placebo. So we think that this is a likely underlying neural marker that's aiding in that increased or enhanced performance on the sustained attention task. All right, and I said I'm going to skip over some of the other results that we had in the actual study, but just as a quick recap of the young adult study, MediTrain was associated with enhanced sustained attention, and also I didn't show you this, but they actually showed a small but significant increase in working memory capacity following training, and these changes were accompanied by increases in midfrontal theta coherence and also the amplitude and latencies of an attentional ERP, event-related potential, the P3B. So that was what we found in young adults. And then, so this was really exciting because, we were able to to show that using this fairly novel digital approach to meditation, we were able to get some really powerful increases in attention. And this actually kind of made us start to think, and also from colloquial reports of people saying, oh yeah, it also, I think my stress levels went down, I was able to fall asleep quicker, but we didn't actually have any quantitative metrics of those in that initial study, which is one of the reasons why we reached out to Alyssa and Eric to talk to them about how we could get a better measure of that. So I'll talk about that in the older adult study. Before that, I do want to just briefly show some of the results from the study that was done in India, because I think it's really interesting that we see some very similar impacts on cognition in a completely different population. So the study participants here were 45 children between 10 and 18 years of age, not 80. So they're all adolescents that were recruited from a foster care center in New Delhi. And here you can see a group of them training with the app. I think MediTrain is open there. And these children all had reported early adverse childhood experiences, not unexpected for children who end up in foster care. And all the children were stable in foster care for at least 2 years prior to the start of the study. And this is just kind of an overview of the intervention. So they did a baseline assessment that included MRI, cognitive testing, and behavioral assessments of hyperactivity type behaviors. Then they were randomly assigned to one of 3 groups. Internal attention was MediTrain. External attention was another active control. It was another training paradigm that was more of a game-like paradigm. And then there was a group that had no intervention. So they trained, it was actually 6 weeks, it says 8 weeks, but it was 6 weeks. And then they came back in and they did all the assessments again. And then they actually also recorded, or they obtained academic records so they could see how they were performing in school. And then they did a 1-year follow-up. So they went back in a year and they did the behavioral assessments and the academic assessments. So here are some of the results. First off, so the GLT plotted the data a little differently, so it doesn't look like my charts from before. But what you can see here, she actually used the same TOVA sustained attention task that we used in young adults. And what she found is that only the group that did MediTrain showed a positive reduction in, this is going up because she changed it to Z-scores. It's a little confusing. But this is actually representing a reduction in variability of responses on that TOVA task. And the other 2 groups, the active control group and the no contact group, showed, and if anything, the opposite changes. They also showed an increase in interference processing indexed with the Stroop task, which so if you have questions about that, I can explain it. So that was really, this was really exciting to us because this was basically an exact replication of our finding in young adults on the TOVA in a completely new population. So that was pretty nice to see. In terms of academic performance, the MediTrain group actually showed a significant, well, I should say it's not, this isn't a change. This is just the academic performance after the intervention. But the group that did MediTrain had better academic performance than the other two groups. And then the last thing that was really, really interesting is that there were improvements in measures of behavioral hyperactivity in the MediTrain group. So they had fewer reports of hyperactive behaviors at both immediate follow-up, but also at 1-year follow-up. So there's a significant improvement in behavior that is sustained for an entire year after the training. And then there's also significantly fewer children who actually got a diagnosis of ADHD at time 3. So that's the 1-year follow-up. So really, you know, we're seeing some of the same types of improvements in cognition, but also, you know, some real world improvements in academics and behavioral hyperactivity that last a long time in these individuals.
And what, David, what was the sample size on that one?
Yeah, it was 45 total, and then there were 15 in each of the intervention arms.
So then when you're talking about the ADHD diagnoses, like what kind of numbers are you?
That's a good, I would have to go back and look. I don't know off the top of my head. Sorry. It's not that high though.
Yeah, really interesting though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I will go back and check. That's worth knowing. Yeah, thank you. Just one quick neuro result from this, and then I'll move on to the older adult data. So we, Giotti looked at functional connectivity. It's a way of looking at the strength of connections between important networks. And what she found was when she seeded the analysis in this anterior region, it's approximately the anterior cingulate, and it's an important cognitive control region. What she found is in the children who trained with MediTrain, there was significantly increased functional connectivity between the anterior cingulate and this frontal opercular region here. So this is what's called the singular opercular network. And this is a key network for cognitive control that actually is actively undergoing development during this time period. Its main development happens in the sort of late adolescent years. And it suggests that maybe this is even sort of accelerating that development in these, that MediTrain is accelerating that development in these children. And these are just correlations between some of the outcome measures and the strength of that connectivity. All of them significant and in the positive direction. So this definitely suggests that this appears to be a critical underlying neural mechanism for the improvements in behavior and cognition. So just to kind of sum up here, now we also have a replication of the sustained attention findings in adolescents. We have an indication that there's increased functional connectivity in a cognitive control network. And a couple of these metrics, the improvement was maintained for an entire year after the intervention. Okay, so the last study I'll tell you about is our older adult study. This is the one that we haven't published yet. We just completed it, and we're through much of the analysis. We're still wrapping up analyses of some of the MRI data and EEG data, but we really hope to get this submitted to a journal within the next month or two. Again, the protocol is very similar, 6 weeks, 5 days per week. The older adults came in and did MRI, EEG, cognitive testing. We also added a 9 to 12 month follow-up. So somewhere between 9 and 12 months, we asked them to come back in and do the assessments again. And as I mentioned, we also, thanks to our collaboration with Eric and Alyssa, we also took blood draws at pre and post. We didn't do them at follow-up for just financial and logistical reasons, but we got them at pre and post so we could look at some key biomarkers of various things. Same primary cognitive outcome measures, although this time I'm going to focus on the filter task, so I'll tell you about that in just a minute. And then we also added another functional outcome, a stress reactivity task, the Montreal imaging stress test. And we measured, during that, we measured heart rate variability and skin conductance measures. This is the study group, 30 in the MediTrain group, 29 in placebo. No significant differences in any of, so these are all some key neuropsychological tests. So with older adults, we do a extensive neuropsychological testing battery before they are enrolled in a study. We don't do that with young adults, but we just basically make sure that all of these are sort of cognitively healthy older adults. So no significant differences between the groups. So here's the main task I'm going to focus on for this one, the filter task. So it's somewhat different, but it requires a lot of the same sustained attention, but there's also a working memory component. So the participants are shown a fixation point, and they're cued to either the left or the right. And the cue tells them which items they need to maintain in memory. And then they're shown an array like this. Oops, sorry. And they have to remember the red bars and ignore the green and blue bars. And there's either one red bar that they have to maintain in memory, or 3 bars. So it gets much harder when there are 3 bars because they're in different orientations. Then there's a short memory delay, about a second. And after that, they're shown a new probe array, and they have to say, is this bar in the same place and orientation as this one, right? So they have to, and this happens, it's hard to get a sense for it here, but this happens very fast. So it is, you really have to kind of sustain your attention and keep focused on it. So what we found in this study, in the older adult study, if we look from pre to post, again, this is looking at response time variability, we saw a significant decrease in the MediTrain group and no change in the control group. So again, the MediTrain group is getting is showing more consistent performance in terms of trial by trial variability after training with MediTrain for 6 weeks. And then really exciting that the reduction in variability was actually maintained at the 9-month follow-up. So this is a sustained benefit, and they weren't continuing to train with MediTrain. They may have done their own meditation, and we're actually looking into that with some surveys to see if there were different sort of lifestyle changes between these 2 groups. So this is, we're really quite excited about this, that we're showing this sustained benefit and a partial replication of the young adult study again on another task. And then just for comparison, because we did do this filter task in young adults, this is showing the baseline data for our young adults on the filter task. And what you can see is that at baseline, the older adults were quite far away. They're much worse. So they're performing much more inconsistently. And after the training, they're much closer. They're not quite at the young adult levels yet, but they're much closer to young adult levels. So they're really improving in terms of their sustained attention. All right, so that's, we again, in this group as well, I'm not going to show it here, but we also saw, we did the sustained attention to response task and saw a very similar pattern on another task as well. So pretty consistent improvements. So now I just want to wrap up with these two new measures for me, and this is actually where I'd love to get some feedback from you, who are the real experts in the stress and aging field. So for the stress reactivity, we decided to use the Montreal imaging stress test. This is a test that was developed to be used in an MRI scanner, but we wanted something that we could do fairly easily in our setup. It's a complex mental arithmetic task that's done under speeded responses. So you can see this here, you can't really tell right now, but this is a time bar that elapses fairly quickly. And what we tell the participants is this is their performance here, shown by the little arrow. And this is showing what average performance, what we call average performance in healthy older adults. This is low performance and this is poor performance. The mean thing about this is that we make the math impossibly difficult, or nearly impossibly difficult to do in the time provided. And we give them negative feedback as well. And they're basically, they hardly ever are able to get out of red. So they think that they're doing really poorly on this task. And we also tell them that there's an experimenter in the other room monitoring their performance to make sure that they're performing at a reasonable level. So it's, again, with any stress task, it's not a very nice thing to do, but it gives us a really nice index of stress. And this is a paper from Jones et al. Showing the salivary cortisol response. This is the stress period here in gray. And you can see, so this cortisol, the stress response just goes up dramatically as they do this stressful task. And you can really, like, as we see, they really, really get frustrated with this task. So there's that. So here's what the main finding that we have found a change in is in heart rate variability. So what we looked at was the ratio of the low frequency to high frequency component. So this is the spectral component. Many of you probably know much more about this than we do. This is kind of our first foray into heart rate variability. But what we saw is a significant decrease in this ratio from pre to post in the MediTrain group and no change in control. And again, this was sustained at the 1-year follow-up. So they did this test, 9-month follow-up. So we had this sustained improvement in this in regulation of heart rate variability during this stressful task. So we're pretty excited about that. I'd love to get feedback from all of you on that as well. And then the last thing I have is, this is just a little background. I don't need to tell most of you about this because it's your own work. But this
and actually, we have Cliff with us, who's the senior author on this paper.
Oh, great.
Aaron.
Great. Yeah, this is a fairly recent paper from a series of papers that were done. And they looked at, you looked at telomere length and telomerase activity in participants who either attended a 1-month intensive retreat, meditation retreat, or I think it was insight meditation, correct me if I'm wrong, or a control group. And there was a significant increase in telomere length following the retreat. And again, the telomeres are this sort of really critical marker of cellular stress and aging. And this is, your model for how meditation mindfulness might impact telomerase activity. So we thought we were really interested to see if this digital form of meditation might have some of the same effects, right? So it's a very different approach to meditation than mindfulness. We don't really have a mindfulness component. We're taking a very cognitive approach to meditation. It's sustained attention. That was really what we were focused on improving. But we had reports of people reporting less stress. So we thought, well, we should probably measure this and see if it really is doing something to stress. So we also looked at the TS ratio of telomere length, and thanks to Eric for helping with these analyses and coordinating them. And what we found is a significant interaction at post between the control group and the MediTrain group. And this is driven by a significant increase in telomere length in the MediTrain group. So the actual baseline difference, it looks like it would be significant, but I did statistics on it and it isn't. And I know with some advice from Melissa and Eric, we've tried to pretty much rule out a lot of the different potential confounders. So this seems like a pretty reliable change that we're seeing in the telomere length and an improvement after MediTrain. So just to wrap up, now we can fill in with the healthy older adults that we had again increased enhanced sustained attention that was actually maintained at 9 months. And then this, we now have evidence that it appears these are still sort of first pass analyses. We want to flesh them out, but that MediTrain may mitigate stress reactivity and improve these cellular markers of stress and aging. Just the last thing, I'll give you a little highlight of some future directions that we're planning. We're hoping to move into a patient population, patients with mild cognitive impairment. And one of the reasons why we're really interested in MCI is that one of the key cognitive features that is associated with MCI is an increase in RT variability. They tend to be, these individuals with memory impairments tend to be much more variable on cognitive tasks. So if we have an intervention that can improve RT variability, it makes sense that that might actually help them maintain some higher level of cognitive function. And just a little teaser, we actually had a subset of our older adults who had a MoCA score. This is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. It's used it's a general cognitive function assessment, a fairly blunt tool. But scores below 26 are often indicative of somebody who's kind of on the verge of being diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. these people don't have an actual diagnosis, but it's kind of a proxy for MCI. And the interesting thing, if we look at RT variability on that filter task, the magnitude of this change is double what we saw in the healthy population. So it seems like these older adults with some memory impairment or potential cognitive difficulties are actually showing more improvement from MediTrain than other people. So we're really excited to get this, get a study going in MCI. I think Alyssa mentioned that we've been interested in trying to do a collaboration where we administer this to caregivers of older adults, caregivers of dementia patients. We've actually developed a French version. We have an affiliate in Nice who's interested in using this in TBI patients over there. And then we're also working on a new version in collaboration with Jack Cornfield to use the same sort of adaptivity, but with a focus on compassion meditation as opposed to sustained attention. Then we have another collaborator, Melina Unkaffer, who is interested in taking MediTrain into schools, into high schools. And then we were talking before I started, we're also really excited about moving these studies fully mobile, right? Which is really appropriate in the time of the pandemic. So we've actually been working on the development of our platform called Nexus, which is going to be an online platform for conducting fully remote RCTs. Our first study we're planning is we're going to offer MediTrain to anyone at UCSF as kind of a test of the platform. But then we also have plans to deploy this across the US and older adults. We have a partnership with Brookdale Senior Living Communities. So this is the largest community or a group of senior living centers. They have 1,000 locations across the US, and they're interested in offering this to all of any of the locations. So the older adults that are in their communities would have access to MediTrain. And then one of the things we're really interested in is once we have this ability to do these large scale studies, we can ask questions about what's the optimal dose, right? We arbitrarily picked, 20 minutes, five days a week, but it could be we could get away with much less, or maybe we get more effect if they do more. So we're interested in kind of doing some of these more development studies to see, who benefits the most and at what dose. All right, so just all of my collaborators and contributors, lots of folks at Neuroscape and the MAC and psychiatry. And then, of course, the funders, NIH, as well as a number of philanthropists have provided money for this. And of course, we couldn't have developed the app without zynga.org and Jack Cornfield. Thank you. Yeah. Why don't I?
All right, that was fantastic, David. Thank you so much.
So we can, yeah.
People.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes and there's so much to talk about. That was an amazing, very, very exciting platform and program. And the directions you're heading in are incredibly inspiring, large scale. We've had, since you started, we had Cliff join us and also Eve, who is not doing yoga right now, but is behind the picture. So I know, do we still have Wendy? You showed some heart rate variability, and I think we definitely could talk about that. What is there, raise your hand if you have a question, everyone watching. Okay. So why don't we go Cliff, Steffi, Alexandra, and David, I want to make sure we get to what you want to discuss most. So was it the heart rate variability or was it some other components?
Yeah, I think feedback on the heart rate variability and the stress reactivity of the telomere length. Those are the to us, the things that we have the least experience with. So yeah, knowing how to interpret that and potential things that we want to be careful about, I would love feedback on that.
So I'll keep it very short then.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you so much for a very interesting talk. I'm very happy to see all these different kinds of converging data.
Yeah.
So my question is about the actual performance data on the sustained attention task, because if you're just looking at response time variability, like particularly with respect to the filter task, how was their variability related to their actual accuracy in performing the task? Same
Right.
with whether you did signal detection, A prime, and looked at the continuous performance task, or was that so easy to do, it was close to threshold. So I'm
Sure.
curious about that in terms of the behavioral results of accuracy.
Yeah, and so it varies a little bit depending on the group, right? So in the young adults, what we did, I didn't show this, but we also looked at just plain response time. We looked at accuracy. We looked at deep hit rate and D prime as well. And what we saw is, so there's a decrease in RT. There was a numeric. Actually, there was no change in actual RT. If anything, there was a trend toward getting better, which we were happy with, because if they got slower but were more consistent, that wouldn't necessarily be a good thing. There was no, you were right, the young adults were pretty much at ceiling for accuracy in D prime, but there was no speed accuracy trade-off, right? So we didn't see any evidence of that. So we were pretty happy with that. In the older adults, we actually saw on the TOVA, we saw both a decrease in RT and an improvement in or decrease in false alarm rate on that as well. So they actually seem to be improving on other measures as well. I just really focused today on the RT variability.
And the filter task?
The filter task, they show, I don't think they show any change in D prime or accuracy. So the only real change is the decrease in RT variability. Okay. So again, at least they're not showing speed accuracy trade-off is the main thing. Yeah, okay. Good point. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Hi, David. This was a fantastic talk, I have to say. I was very curious about your the Indian sample that has been exposed to early life adversity. I was wondering if the severity somehow impacted the findings. Were some people higher or lower on early life adversity, more or less able? Were the results kind of moderated by that?
On the ACEs, the number of ACEs?
Yeah.
I don't know that we didn't look at a correlation between that. I know we have, there was a large range. The majority of the children, I think over half of them had reported 1 or 2 childhood ACEs. And then, but there were some others that had 4 to 6, something like that. So that's getting pretty high. I would have to go back and look. That's an interesting question to see.
Just to see if they are able to kind of, is it maybe a factor that's getting in the way, or kind of is the MediTrain really helping them to kind of focus with the rumination or any kind of intrusions? Yeah. And if I might sneak in another quick question, I was so curious about your MediTrain compassion one. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so the main idea is to use the same game mechanics it's not really a game, but the same underlying sort of mechanics of adaptability, but instead of focusing on your breath, the idea would be to use some of these traditional compassion phrases, right? So be repeating these compassionate phrases toward yourself, toward a stranger, toward a loved one, and the idea would be to start with a loved one. And then, Jack Kornfield has a whole progression that they would go through, where they start with sort of an easy thing. It's easy to be compassionate toward loved ones. And then you might move toward, yourself, which could be a little more difficult. Some people are better than others at being compassionate with themselves. And then, moving beyond that. But the idea would be you would increase the amount of time, basically, how long are you able to maintain these feelings in this repetition, and then increase that over time. So that's kind of the basic idea. We're still working it out. It's in development.
That's super exciting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, David. I'm up next. So good. So nice to see the results. If you remember, I was the one that
I know
completed the caregiving pilot study that you mentioned on your slide. And one thing that I ran into with using MediTrain in that group is that it's really hard. It's a really challenging activity to do for 20 minutes a day. And so I was wondering if you had any of the emotional or psychological data in terms of how people who were able to actually do it responded to that great stress task you had. Like, did it actually improve somebody's ability to get through something that's frustrating and difficult?
Yeah, I mean, so the main thing I think that would speak to that is we did a number of surveys, including like perceived stress scale. We did a rumination scale. Off the top of my head, there were several others. Unfortunately, we didn't see any movement on any of those scales, which honestly, I mean, we do these surveys all the time and we hardly ever see changes on them. And I think partly we tend to think it's because, you know, we're doing these deep dive small sample studies where we're collecting tons of data on a relatively, you know, 30 in a group is relatively small, but they're expensive to get MRI, EEG, blood, all of this stuff. So we are limited. We're really interested in when we go fully mobile, if we'll be able to get like, so one of the big questions I mentioned is dose, right? Like you said, 20 minutes is hard for a lot of people, especially say like as you experience caregivers who already have an, you know, huge burden of what they're dealing with. To take 20 minutes a day is really hard for them. So one of the questions is, well, could we get away with 5 minutes a day, you know, or, you know, maybe fewer days out of the week or something like that. So we're really interested in kind of titrating the dose effects when we're able to just, you know, when we can do this completely remotely and we don't have, you know, we don't have the burden of bringing people into the lab. I think we can get at answers to some of those questions. So yeah, I think that, but in terms of your question about the sort of emotional changes, I don't have any, you know, I don't have any evidence for that. You know, I could potentially try to look at some subgroups, like are there subgroups within the individuals who showed more or less change in emotional reactivity, but I haven't done that yet. Oh, Alyssa, I think
Muted.
muted. Yeah.
Unmute. Unfortunately, it's still a high frequency word in 2021. Okay, so some of us are slower at learning. Maybe I need MediTrain. I was just going to say, David, this is so exciting. Let's have a offline meeting with Eric and, you know, maybe Alexandra, since you're interested, and really look at your data, right? Because
Sure.
There's definitely, when you look at these individual trait differences on average, they're so mushy, right? We don't see change, but they're definitely moderator effects that people with high ACEs might be more responsive, et cetera. And then we can talk about the biomarkers then too. And, you know, because we have an amazing group right now, let's spend, those who can stay 5 minutes, let's talk about HRV. We have, you know, people who have measured it here, like Cliff and Eric, and Eve has been reading a lot about it. And so I'll just give you I don't even have 2 cents. I have 1 cent on this. But I should start with what you showed us was remarkable. I would say you want high frequency. That's what you care about, not the decrease in low frequency, but the increase in high frequency. And if you look at it that way, you showed us an improvement in vagal tone from pre to post 6 weeks. And it's very hard to change resting vagal tone. So if this is true, this is a really, really interesting finding. So let's hear from Cliff and Eric and anyone else who wants to comment on that. Philippe.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm currently an expert in looking at this at all, though it's part of what we are planning to do in oncoming studies. What is the change in respiration rate as a function of the meditation training that can also influence this measure and this ratio? Because one of the things that the meditation training characteristically does is it shifts your baseline. You sort of now know something to do when you're doing nothing. Because you always have your object, your breath, and depending upon whatever the visceral afference is of your state of perceived well-being, if you've gotten the training to self-regulate, you can change your state by changing your breath, which will then implicate changes in heart rate variability. So you don't have a respiration measure.
Unfortunately, no. Yeah. Yeah, we just didn't have the equipment yet. We're actually moving in that direction. We're going to be, we're really fleshing out our physiology suite. So we're going to be moving to that. So hopefully we'll have it in the future. But
do you have any correlations between self-report data and changes in the autonomic response, vagal tone?
What's like, what kind of self-reports were you thinking?
Well-being, ease, calm.
Again, yeah, so we do have some of those
Stress,
in survey
perceived
form.
stress.
Yeah, I haven't looked at correlations. So I only looked at like pre-post changes in the averages. So yeah, I should go back and look at correlations. Maybe something will emerge there.
Because
Yeah,
sometimes
good
you
idea.
can get paradoxical things where people's
Yeah.
perceived sense is quite different than your inference from their physiological change.
Sure.
So Alexandra, would you say that his finding is novel? You've just been reading a lot about heart rate
Yeah,
variability.
I mean, I've studied it in used it in multiple studies as well. I mean, I think the key question is that with heart rate variability, you get about 15 different markers. And so if there's just a change in one in such a small sample, I mean, that could have been, I really have to see all of the more commonly used, I mean, RMSSD, for example, things. And then I agree with Cliff. I think that there's, to just call it stress reactivity, you have to see it in combination, not just with the emotional and psychological aspects, like I was inferring yesterday, but also with, do you have like blood pressure or general heart rate? So we could also look at the whole combination of stress reactivity versus just singling out one specific measure that happens to be significant.
Yeah, that's interesting. We certainly have heart rate, just regular heart rate. We don't have blood pressure, but yeah.
Do you have pulse transit time?
I will have to check. I'm not sure.
Because if you have the EKG and the finger plethysmography, you can calculate it.
We don't have the EKG, so we just have the the optical heart rate. Yep.
Right.
Well, I just want to say with the biomarkers, it's not like if we kind of go on averages of what we'd expect from past studies, we don't really see correlations between the subjective report change and the biomarker change, David. So don't expect that. I think you already, know that, like with Steve Cole's studies, when he's looking at gene expression, he may consistently find a reduction in the pro-inflammatory, composite, but it never correlates with psychological well-being, even though we know it's stress adversity related.
Yeah, but we have it in our studies. We have seen, but our intervention, our intervention is a completely different order, several orders of magnitude different.
Looks like Eve either has a question or she's putting a hand up to say stop.
High five. Thanks. Hi, Eric. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the presentation. Really compelling to hear not only what's already been discovered, but I share the interest in this compassion version. And, I'm curious, given, that it sounds as though, which is great, that compassion will be used as an object of attention, right? So you'll actually continue to be training attention, but with this pro-social motivation. And it would be wonderful to see if that had any shifts or changes on like the IAT or even self-report measures of empathy. That would
can you tell me what IAT is?
Oh, sorry, the implicit attitude test.
Ah, yes.
So like whether or not like bias actually could get shifted or changed by especially the kind of compassion meditation you're describing, which is really expanding our sphere of concern. So yeah, that's an exciting prospect. I'm curious, especially with the study in India, which is so impressive. Your colleague did a fascinating job of taking a very hard population, and how accessible do you think this could be for those children, for those kids? Like, is the equipment maybe moving towards something that's a bit easier to administer and sustain with populations who may not have resources?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what we're hoping, especially with moving toward, again, when we originally developed this due to constraints from Zynga and others, it was really tablet-based, iOS. So there were constraints there, but now we've actually spent a lot of time over the last year making it cross-platform. You can do it on any mobile device, a phone, even going back like 10 generations of Android and that sort of thing. So, and we've also tried to, that we made as Alexandra knows, the instructions were not the most kind of, welcoming in the original version, which didn't matter when we were meeting the people face to face, right? Because we could talk to them and talk them through things. But we've actually invested a lot of time in animating the instructions and making it interactive. So I think it's going to be a lot more accessible. And the idea is with our mobile platform is that we can send this to anybody as long as they just need some kind of smartphone device. So I mean, one of the constraints, well, I mean, you're probably talking about kids in general, not just India, but yeah, there would be language constraints there because they actually had, you know, people in their classroom who were explaining, you know, in their own language how to do the training. But yeah, we're definitely interested in moving in that direction. Certainly within the English-speaking world first. But
Great.
Yeah. And thank you for the comment, because one of the things that, you know, we haven't really fleshed out is when we, you know, we're not at the point of being ready to do the compassion study, but we'll be really interested in figuring out what are the right metrics. You know, we're great at figuring out cognitive metrics, but we don't have so much experience with the other things. So yeah, so I'll look into the IAT and some of those other things. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.
So this was great. This was a great way to start 2021 and our AME meetings. David, thank you so much for sharing your work, and we look forward to the further progress and the discussion. And look out for an email from Elena or Alyssa or I about upcoming meetings. We're hoping to make this regular and exciting and insightful and a sense of community during this time. So enjoy the rest of your day and weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful to see you all.
Bye.
Thank you, David.
Yes.
Amazing.